there. Okay. Are there any questions about any of the programs that I have done up to this point? Especially those that can be in the midterm. Any questions about the bouncing ball program and the enhanced bouncing ball program? Question?
I think the hardest part for me was just figuring out the X and Y coordinates for the sprite that we did.
Okay. Okay. So the XY coordinate thing has to do with where is 0, 0. Because once you know it's 0, 0, the rest is. Okay, so if I understand your question correctly, it's first of all you have to find the coordinate of the sprite, right? Okay. So what you need to do is to write a program to kind of help you understand well, you don't even need a program. I'll show you exactly what you need to get that part going. All right, so let's go to App Inventor first. Okay, so what I'm doing now is to basically address the question of how the XY coordinate works, how they work in a canvas. So let's go ahead, and I'll start a new project to do this. So let's go. Okay, so go to. Okay, I'm already at my projects. I'll start a new project, and we'll just call it coord for coordinate. All right. So the first thing you want to do is to put a canvas into the main screen and make it as big as possible. So the canvas itself would fill parent in terms of width and also in terms of height. Okay. Then you put a ball sprite into it. Okay. And what you do is you observe the coordinate of the ball sprite even when it is inside the viewer. So let me see if I can display both of these together. It's a little bit tricky, but I think we can do it. So let's see. Okay, see the ball sprite has a X coordinate and a Y coordinate. If I push the ball all the way to the upper left corner, you can see the XY become, well, I guess negative a little bit because it's a little bit beyond the boundary. On the other hand, if I move it, okay, I have now selected the canvas, but alrighty, come on. Okay, now I have selected the ball sprite. If I move it all the way to the lower right-hand corner, you can see the XY now become 301 for X, which is the horizontal distance, and 388, which is the vertical distance. So is that helping to answer the question? Okay. So X is basically how far it is away from the left edge, and then the Y coordinate is how far it is away from the top edge. Any other questions? Any other questions related to the programs that we have done up to this point? No questions? It's all good so far? Okay. Alright, so if there are no questions about the stuff that we have done so far, then we'll continue to look into subroutines and we'll continue to look into lists. Okay? How many people have already started to integrate lists into your project? Okay, you have not. How many people have already started to think about how to use lists in your project? Okay, very good. Okay, so what we'll do today is to kind of focus on lists, and we can even use some of our existing programs as an example. Okay, all right. So what I'll do is I am going to get rid of this program, go back to my main project here, and I'm just going to get rid of some of these items that I don't really need anymore. And we'll go ahead and start a new one. In fact, instead of starting a new one, I'm going to go to test lists, which is one of the programs that I have written already. This one has got 3 buttons. It has got one button called Save and Decode, Load and Decode. Of course, the magic is not in the display itself. The magic is in the blocks. So let's switch to the blocks and then find out what this program is doing. So let's zoom out. All right. So this is the click event handler of the save and encode button. Let's find out what it's doing. Can someone tell me what is the first block doing? What is this purple block doing? Just from the name of the block itself, what do you think it's doing?
It's adding a value to the TinyDB database.
It's storing or overwriting. So if that tag test is already in the TinyDB, it's going to go to overwrite it. Okay. And then what about the second thing that we are doing here? Now this is a little bit more complicated because let's finish the first one first, okay? So with the first one, we're overwriting a particular tag in DB1, okay, TinyDB1. That thing may be there already. If it is already there, it will overwrite it. If it's not there, it will convert it. So the tag itself is test. In other words, every time you want to store something into a TinyDB1, the tag itself has to be in text. So it can be anything. It can even have space in it. But I personally would recommend not to have space in your tag, just so that it is more like a variable. What about this part here? It is it's a block called make a list. So what do you think this block does? It makes a list, right? Okay, so it makes a list of 2 items. The first item plugs into the first notch, which is right here, and then the second item plugs into the second notch, which is here. So we have a list that has 2 items. The second item is easy. The second item is really just a number, which is 0 in this case. The first item of that list by itself is also a list. So this is a list with 2 items. The first one is the string A, lowercase a, and then the second one is backslash, open square bracket, and close square bracket. I just chose some really weird letters, or punctuations in this case, just to make sure my code does work when I am encoding everything into JSON, the formatting standard. Do we have any questions about this block overall? The entire thing, like this whole thing here. Yep.
Just want to make sure, is there a reason we set the second part of our first list to 0, or is there any number that we can put in there? Why is it 0?
Well, you can put anything. I was using this to test whether the JSON serialized the JSON subroutine is working for strings, lists, and also for numbers. So I have a mixture of stuff here.
Say if we put in a 2, how would that change our program?
It won't change much because I'm not using that value for anything other than actually just storing and see how it is stored.
Okay.
So it wouldn't make any difference if I change this value here to a random number. That wouldn't change. As long as it is a number, it will still work the same way.
Okay.
Any other questions? So the purpose of this program is not really so much to do anything, but to illustrate how to use a list and how to use the JSON serializing subroutine, which is already done. I mean, you guys can put it into the backpack and put it into your own project. So there's no need for you to write that subroutine again. Okay. Any other questions about the first block? The second block is a little bit interesting because the second block is to set the text of label 4, which is one of the labels. But I'm setting the text to the serialized version. Okay, now this is my own subroutine. This is my own subroutine called serialized JSON, which means I will give it something and it will turn it into one long string, so that we can potentially store something that is structured as a string, as a single string, which is really helpful. Okay? Because you can then text the string to somebody else. You can use the texting method to send a message that is actually that has more stuff embedded in it. And I'm really using the same list here. You can see that this block here is really the same block here. And then I set the other labels to just empty string, and empty string here. This is what save and code is going to do. All right, well, let's go ahead and try it out and find out what it actually does. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start up. For this one, there's no need to use the up-to-date simulator, so I'll just go the easy route and use this particular one. Well, as the emulator is started, are there any questions about how to make use of a list? No questions? Okay. So maybe, after this program is illustrated, I'll give you a really generalized program where you can add anything into a list of key value pairs. Okay, so I think that will really help to illustrate how to make use of a list and how to make use of a key value pair. Right, emulator is starting up. We're almost there. Did anyone get buy an Android tablet? Just for this class. Maybe a cheap, really inexpensive one. You did? Okay. Which one did you get?
No, I don't even know. It was the one you suggested, and then I opened it and the screen was cracked already, so I'm not sending it back.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm like, do I really want it? Because if it's not,
If it's cracked already, you definitely want to send it back.
no, but if it's so easily cracked.
I don't know what type of why it cracked, because you got it cracked. When you got it, it was already cracked. So I have no idea whether it was cracked when it was being shipped or it was cracked before they shipped it. It's a refurb item. They should have fixed it before they sent it out.
It was probably cracked during the shipping.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, because
When they threw it in the truck.
and have some other heavier items drop on top of it too. Does the box looks like it's crushed? No?
Oh.
But
Yeah, if it's refurb, it is supposed to be at least functional and not broken. So I would definitely send it back.
still, except I just got it. So
Oh, you just got it? Okay.
I haven't even used it at all, so.
Okay. Yeah, if the screen is cracked, definitely return it. Alright, so here's the program. So the first thing I'm going to do is to click this button here, which is save and encode. So as soon as I press this button, you can see the other three labels, they go away. And then we have one last row here that is, the JSON encoded version of the content of the list. I know this is really tiny, so what I'll do is I will see if I can magnify this a little bit by using a Snapshot Tool. So we'll take a screenshot and select a region. I'm just going to pick out this portion here. And looks like we do have quite a few tools to do it. The GIMP is a good one. It's a little bit hefty, but it's a good one. Alright, so we do have a screenshot of the portion that I want to look at, and we'll just go ahead and magnify this portion. Yeah. Oh, that's not helping. Alright, let me see if there's another way to do it. I'll copy it to a text editor. I think that would be better. There we go. Okay, so it looks like this. Open square bracket, open square bracket, double quote A, double quote backslash, double quote, and then we have backslash, backslash, open bracket, close bracket, a comma, another double quote, a close bracket, a comma, a zero, and then a double quote. There we go. Alright, so I think that's the content. I cannot see very clearly, but I think that's it. Okay, so this is the encoded version of the list that we're dealing with. I intentionally picked something that is kind of difficult to deal with. So let's see if we can find out what this is. The square brackets are the easy ones. Okay, when you see a square bracket, it means it is a list. So we have a list of two items. The first item is this entire list here. The second item is the 0. So when you look into the blocks here, that's exactly what we have here. But what is not clear is, okay, what about the A here? What about the letter A? The letter A is a string, so every string is enclosed by double quotes. Okay, so if you have a very simple string, it would just be double quote, the content of the string, and double quote, and that's the end of it. Okay, but the second string is a little bit trickier. I intentionally picked something that is tricky because the second string, if you can see it here, it starts with a double quote itself. So if double quote itself is a part of the content, but it is also used to mark the beginning and the end, what are we going to do about it? How do you represent a double quote when it is a part of the content?
Use an escape character.
You use what we call an escape character, exactly. Okay. So in the text representation, let's take a look at the text representation. In fact, I can display these side by side, so I can compare this list here with the representation here. So the representation of a single quote, which is the first character in the string, is a backslash. Okay? When you use the backslash character, it means, okay, the following thing is just the way it is supposed to be, or it is special. So when you say backslash the double quote, it really means, oh, the double quote itself is a part of the content of the string. And that's why this double quote here is not used to mark the end of the string, because it's right after a double quote. Excuse me, it's right after a backslash. Is that okay? All right. Okay. So what is next to the double quote in this string here? Is a backslash itself. So a backslash itself is also requires escaping, because a single backslash simply means escaping whatever is next to it. So when you want the backslash itself to be a part of the content, then it needs to escape itself using another backslash. So what that means is two backslashes right next to each other is really just specifying a single backslash as the content of the string. The square brackets are not escaped. They don't need to be escaped because they're already double quoted. So when they're double quoted, there's no way that we can misinterpret these two square brackets as a list, as the beginning or the end of a list. So that's why the square brackets as a part of a string is not escaped. There's no need to escape it. The comma is also not escaped because it is a part of the double quoted string, so there's no need to escape that either. So this quote, this double quote symbol is actually ending this particular double quote here, so that marks the string, the end of this string here. And then because this entire thing is the first list, we have a comma here to separate it from the second item of the top level list. So a comma is used to separate items of the same list. It's a separator. Are we doing okay so far with this stuff here or not? For the most part, you don't really need to know, the underlying details, but sometimes, when you're debugging your program, you might want to know, okay, what is my program transmitting as a list? And knowing how to interpret this stuff here can be helpful when you're debugging your program. Are we doing okay so far with this? Yes, no, sort of, okay? So the idea of a list, or why a list is useful, because it is kind of like a zip file without the compression. When you are only allowed to transmit one file, okay, with email or whatever, okay, you can only have one attachment, but you have multiple files to transmit to the recipient, what are you going to do? You can only send one file, but in reality, you have multiple files that you really want to send. What do? You zip it up, right? You zip up the multiple files into one single file, which we call a zip file. So now, from the transmission perspective, from the email program perspective, you're only sending one file. But what is the recipient going to do after receiving that file? Unzip it, extract it, exactly. So you will extract multiple files. A list is exactly the same thing. Okay, because a single list can be stored in one variable. It can also be stored as a single item in TinyDB. It can be stored as a single item in Firebase. Okay, it can also be transmitted as a single string. It can be used as a start value. It can be used as a return value across screens. So this is your packaging technology so they can package as much stuff as you want when you need to send information from one place to another. And that's why lists are so important. Are we doing okay so far with the idea of why a list is an important concept? Sort of? Yes? No? More questions, maybe? It's all good? Okay. So if you guys have any questions, do not hesitate to ask, okay? All right, so now that we know how the save button works, let's take a look at the other buttons. This one is decode, okay? This is a decode button. The button itself doesn't really do a whole lot except, it triggers the following operation. The block that I have just highlighted is a local variable block. A local variable block is useful because it allows you to define a local variable. In this case, the name of the local variable is decoded list, which also means this name, this local variable, can only be referred to within this block here. It does not exist outside of this block, and if there's another global variable of the same name, it will hide the global variable of the same name. Okay. It is first initialized to using this portion here. In other words, what it's using is using the text content of label 4, which we just set in the previous click handler. And it will use JSON text decode, which is from a web component. So this is not my code anymore, okay? Because Web 1 already has a method called JSON text decode. I'm just borrowing it. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually just checking whether I can decode that whole thing back into the components that it consists of. Okay? So the first three things I do in this program is to set label 1, 2, and 3 to an empty string. So they will start off as empty. And then we have a conditional block here. So let's take a look at the conditional block. The conditional block only has a then portion. The else portion has no code in it, which is okay. There's no need to fill in both the then and the else block here. The condition itself is, okay, let's see if we can just read the block itself and then figure out what it is supposed to do. It reads if is a list question mark thing, and then the thing is get decoded list, which is the local variable that we just set based on the decoded version of the text content of label 4. Okay? So if you have been tracking this entire program, what is it really checking? Does anyone want to give it a try? Is it a list? Okay, because we can have four different type of things. One is a number, okay, things that you can do multiplication, subtraction, and addition. The second one would be a string, which will be useful to represent names and stuff like that. The third one is a true/false value, a boolean, okay, and then the fourth one is a list, okay. They're all different. You can do different things with these different values. So before I try to use decoded list as a list, I need to make sure that it is in fact a list before I do that. If it's not a list, I will simply do nothing. Okay, if I get to here, which is inside the then block of a conditional block, it means I already know that decoded list is in fact a list. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to extract a particular portion of that list. So let's check out what I'm doing here. What do you think this block does? The name is select list item. It has two slots. The first slot allows you to specify a list. The second slot allows you to specify an index. So what do you think it's doing? Just based on the name of this block. Okay, when you have a list, you can have multiple items in a list. So the items inside the list, they are indexed. Okay, so each item is indexed by its position. The first item is indexed by the number 1. The second item is indexed by the number 2, and so on. So what this block is doing is it is extracting a particular item out of a list. In fact, we're extracting just the first item of this list. Is that okay? All right. So it is extracting the first item out of the decoded list. And do we know anything about that item? Let me switch back to the text representation here. The first item of the list is by itself is also a list. Okay, so that means in this program, this block will give you a list. And what do I do with that list? I feed it to another select list item block. So I will take that list, which is the inner list here, feed it to this select list item, and then say, okay, out of that inner list, I want to pick out the first item. So as a result, what do you think that first item is going to be? So out of this thing here, what is the first item of the first item of the entire thing? A. It's just the letter A, just the string A, right? Double quote A and double quote. Okay. All right, excellent. What about this thing here? It's the same as this one here. So this is basically still getting the inner list, but the other one is selecting the second item, which is the weird string, you know, the backslash. No, it's a double quote, backslash, open square bracket, close bracket, and a comma. Okay? And this one here is really just getting the second item out of the overall list. The overall list is this thing here. The second item of this overall list is just a number 0. So by looking at these things and setting the labels to each one, I am checking to make sure that the encoded version of the list can be decoded properly, because then I can get all the values back. Okay, so this is basically just a program to test whether it works or not. So let's go back to the emulator and check. So I'm going to decode, and I'm not sure how much you guys can see, but it does say a lowercase a here, a double quote, a backslash, open square bracket, close bracket, a comma, and also a 0 here. In other words, I got all the components back the way they're supposed to be. Okay. All right. Are there any questions about this program up to this point? I am not going to explain the subroutine itself, which is serialized JSON. It's a little bit involved, and let's see, it belongs to this comment, so I'm going to hide it away. So this is the actual subroutine serialized JSON. It's a little bit complicated. It's got loops inside, conditional statements, and then the best part of this is the subroutine, which is serialized JSON, can call itself. Okay? If you have not taken CISP 300, you're taking CISP 300 this semester, you will get to these concepts eventually. It's called recursion, okay? Where a subroutine can call itself. It sounds really strange, right? I mean, why would we call a subroutine from itself? It works because you're breaking a big problem into smaller problems. And guess what? Each smaller problem has exactly the same nature as the problem that you started off with. So you just reapply the technique to the smaller problem. It's the classic example of divide and conquer. But the method of conquering is exactly the same. Are we kind of doing okay with this type of concepts? You do not have to write a subroutine like this. You just have to use it when you feel that, okay, I need to serialize a list. So this will be helpful for you to utilize. You don't have to write a subroutine like this. Any questions? No questions?
Do we have a project like this in
No, not in your first midterm. Maybe the second one. The first midterm is based on everything up to and including the second project of the bouncing ball. So all the concepts involved, that we have talked about up to that point can be included in the first picture. But it's still open book and open notes, open YouTube. Okay, so bring your headphone if you think that you might need to watch like certain parts of the YouTube clips. Just bring your headphone. I don't have a problem with that. If you guys want to watch some of the YouTube stuff, while in the exam, it might be helpful if you have an index of all the topics, so you can kind of pinpoint, to like the minute of the lecture instead of having to watch the entire thing. Okay. Any questions about lists up to this point? No questions? All right. Okay, if there are no questions, the next thing I'll do is I will start a new project, but this time I want to illustrate how to use a key value pair, okay, which is a very important concept. Okay, all right. And before I do that, I'm going to put this into the backpack. Okay. Right click, add to backpack. Okay, dragging doesn't work in this case. You have to right click on the block, add it to the backpack. Go back to my main project and start a new one. So the new project is called key value pair because that's what the project is supposed to illustrate. I go to the blocks right away and unpack the backpack. Alright. There we go. So now we have serialized JSON, basically copied and pasted from one project to another. Yep.
So the one question is that when you're using passwords and stuff, basically when you are using passwords, when the user actually logs into your application,
yeah,
you have logged in with passwords. Passwords have to be encrypted. I mean, then in that case, would you have to use the serialization type of subroutine and say,
no. Okay, serialized JSON is not an MD5 algorithm. So if you're talking about storing the hash value, you will have to figure out either implement your own hash value function, or you have to search through the component and see which one has a hash value function. Because it's not a good idea to store plain text password, because then people can just look at the password and type that password and they will get authenticated. So what you need to store is some kind of a hash value of the password itself. So when someone types in the password, you calculate the hash value of the typed password on the screen, and then you compare that to the hash value that you have stored. If someone is to break into your app and actually steal all the hash values, it won't be directly usable, because now you still have to reverse and figure out what string will give you that particular hash value.
Okay, so basically you would have to go and search for a subroutine that does that for you.
Yeah. You can. It's a MD5. MD5 is a standard hash subroutine. It's not very secure, okay, because the rainbow table is available, but just for relatively insecure way of storing a password, you can use that. And I would not be surprised if somebody has written it already. So you just look for MD5 app Inventor, and I will bet you somebody has it already. Okay, so here is somebody's. Okay, so we have SH1 SHA-1 encryption. It's actually pretty secure. This stuff is really secure, and you're more than welcome to take a look at this code here and figure out what you can get out of it. Is that okay?
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. I'm just looking through this, to see if I can quickly find out, okay, all required library uploaded or assets into loaded as assets into the app. Okay, so this is where you get the hash value. Oh, this is tricky. this one is really tricky. I just want to bring this up, in case you want to borrow this code. This is really tricky because all the heavy-duty coding is not done in App Inventor.
It is done on the back end using.
No, it's done in the HTML document that it has included as a part of its assets, and the code is done by not JSON. It's done by JavaScript. So it's actually borrowing the JavaScript from a web component to do all the heavy lifting. And App Inventor is really just saying, okay, JavaScript, go compute this, okay, and then it gets the result back and go like, okay, now I'm going to use it as my own result. So this is really tricky because it also means that for those of you who know how to program in JavaScript, now you have just opened up a whole new possibility of how to write code in App Inventor. How many people know how to write programs in JavaScript? Okay, you might have taken CISW, what, 310?
No, I think it's 400.
400? Okay.
Yeah.
So if you have taken 400, then you can actually utilize JavaScript within App Inventor. And this is an example of that sort of interface, which is really cool. Okay, so let me see if I can decode this and then just kind of quickly explain how it is done. All right. So we got initialize. Okay, so we have two global variables. The first one is development is true, which means it's just a flag to say that are we in development mode. The second one is a parameter. It is initialized to an empty string. And then we have, okay, let me see if I can magnify it just a little bit. Okay, I think that's better. It is fuzzy to begin with. Okay, this is not because of the projector. It is really fuzzy to begin with. So when screen 1 is initialized, it will set the home URL of a web viewer, which is a component you can specify, to a particular component. So when you look at these components, when you look at this URL, what is it specifying? It specifies a file, ://mnt mount /sd card /app inventor /assets /encrypt.html, which is just a file that is local to the Android system. So when you install this particular app, it will also install that into Drive, or it will do something about it. Okay? It will install the HTML document. If it's not under development, it will find the file. It will find the file at a different place. Then it will call web viewer to go home, which means to go back to this page here. When you click the start button, it will first hide the keyboard, set global parameter to the join of the text box text and the secret text with a bar. Okay, so this is just setting the parameter to the bar, and it's preparing the parameter to be sent to the web page. So the next one here is to set web viewer 1 view string to the global parameter, which is what we just set earlier. Then it will call the go home block of web viewer, so the web page will go back to the home page, and then it will enable the clock timer. When the timer expires, it will call this. It will trigger a timer event, and what that will do is it will check to see if the web view string is different from the parameter. If it is different, it's going to reset the timer so it won't trigger again, and they will display the result in a label by using the web viewer 1 view string method to get back to the string. So the result from the HTML JavaScript will be provided in the web view string property. Okay, so it's really kind of tricky. This one is interesting. It's quite interesting.
So the question is that something we need to do for our app, or is it going a?
No, well, for your project, it doesn't have to be a production-ready project, so you don't have to go. You don't have to do something like this.
Oh yeah.
You can store the password in plain text. Just don't publish the app.
Yeah, true.
Okay, it's, as far as I'm concerned, it is good enough. Okay, for this class. So as a toy app, it is okay. But if you want to publish the app, you definitely don't want to store any password in plain text. So is that okay? Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Does everybody else understand the issue of storing password in plain text? Okay. So I'm going to give you a quick introduction to how to deal with passwords. Okay. So normally when you create a new account, doesn't matter where. Can be Gmail, can be some other website, can be some app that is running on your phone. Okay. When you create a new account, what do you typically have to specify? Usually there are two things to specify. Password and username. Okay? So there's a username and then there's a password associated with that username, right? Okay. So let's say, okay, that is no good. We need to put a trash can next to the workstation. I want to kind of digress and talk about this because there are multiple projects that involve, accounts and stuff like that. So I just want you guys to understand these concepts before you try to publish your app, or when you want to make this app professional, either by yourselves or hiring somebody else to do it, at least you will understand the issues. Okay, so let's say this is my username, and my password is just 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. One way to store this is to store this as a list, okay, key value pair on the device itself in DB1. Okay, that's not difficult. Okay, I can do that. So I may have another user called Jack. Jack and Jack, rhymes. 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so now we have two users. And let's just say that this is a video game, or this is some kind of a game that I'm implementing, and then it can keep track of multiple users. There'll be a high score and whatnot. Okay. Every time I want to get into the game, it will ask me to authenticate. Okay. Who are you? I'm Jack. Okay. Prove it. I type in the password 1, 2, 3, 4. So in your application, how do you say that? Oh, okay, you are in fact Jack. Now all the score that you get will be associated with this account and not Jack's account. How can they do that? How can they authenticate me? The natural way is to compare the stored password 1, 2, 3, 4 with whatever the text box has. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay? That's the easiest way to do it. But it has a big problem. Because if someone is to get into the files underlying the TinyDB, it can now see the password of everybody. Right? Because it's stored in plain text. So how do we solve that problem? We solve that problem by what we call an MD5 hash, or a better hash function. A hash function is basically is just mathematically transforming a string into a really, really long hexadecimal string, okay, which to most people doesn't seem to make any sense. So maybe the hash of maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 is 1D 2E 6 7 BF E2 0 1 0 5 AD. Okay? These are what we call hexadecimal digits. We don't need to understand why we use hexadecimal digits in this class, but they're basically from 0 to 9 and then A to N. And each digit can be out of those 16 possible values. And it's going to be long, okay? It's not just going to be this long, but it is kind of long. So instead of storing 1, 2, 3, 4, we don't store this in TinyDB anymore. We are storing the hash value of 1, 2, 3, 4. Instead of storing 5, 6, 7, 8, which is going to have a completely different hash value. Okay, I'm just using an example here. Okay, it might be stored as FE2D 6 1 0 D E2. Oh, okay, I guess that one is still there. 6 6 4 D 6 8. Okay. So it's completely different. Okay, we don't store 5, 6, 7, 8 anymore. we store the hash value of 5678. Okay, same thing happens. Okay, a hacker is going into the file system of Android, retrieve the TinyDB file, and this time that person will retrieve my name with the hash value of 1234, Jack's name, and then the hash value of 5678. And then that person will go like, okay, I want to authenticate as tag. So type in the username tag, that's easy. What about the password? If I were a hacker, what am I going to use as the password? I know the hash value is this mess here. But if I try to type this mess as the password, it's not going to work. I have to find out what original string will give me a hash value of this mess here. Right, exactly. But there's no decoder. That's the beauty of this. It's a one-way street. There's no decoder. Given a hash value, given it's a secure hash value, there's no reverse. There's no way to go back from a hash value back to the original string. But if I am really me, okay, I type in 1234 in the password field, and then your program is going to compute the hash value of 1234, which ends up to be this string here. It will compare the hash value with the stored hash value. And then if the two hash values match, then it will say, okay, you are in fact tag, and it will let me in. But a hacker, just looking at the hash value, will not be easily able to go back to the original password, which is 1234. So that's like it really is just a basic introduction to how to store passwords and how to authenticate when you're dealing with systems like this. But I do want to make sure that you guys get a little exposure, because I do not want anyone to think storing plain text password is okay. It is not okay, but for this class it is okay, because I don't want you guys to do all kinds of complicated stuff like this. Yep.
Okay, so the one question would be that on the top where it says file backslash mount SD card, when it says for the home URL.
Yeah.
So the question is, that if you're putting that into, let's say, App Inventor, where exactly would you store the so-called file? Like, technically, would it be the same path because you are taking it off the phone, or would it be different path?
Well, it says right here, all required libraries and the HTML JavaScript file are uploaded as assets into the app. So I'm suspecting, I haven't done this yet, but I'm suspecting what it means is if you go back to the designer view, the HTML code can be uploaded here. And if you upload the code here, then it will be accessible in this name. It will just be accessible as Android_asset, and then whatever the name is supposed to be. That's my suspicion. Okay, I haven't done it yet, so I cannot tell you for sure that this is what they meant by that.
Okay, because I was planning on trying it, but I wasn't sure if it would work or not.
Well, is a file included in this?
Yeah, it is, around the bottom. No, go up. Right there. Where it says.
Right here.
No, it says right above the miscellaneous, where you have the tag that says HTML. Right above miscellaneous.
Right above what?
Right above miscellaneous.
A little above.
Yeah, right there. That's
The script here?
Yeah, that's the JavaScript.
Okay, so let me take a quickie look at the JavaScript. Okay, this one is just splitting the string because of the bar. It will split into two halves. So the URL splits into two halves. The first half is here. The second half is here. So it relies on crypt2JS as a subroutine, as an object. That is coming in from these two JavaScript files. So this one is a JavaScript source file. This is also another JavaScript source file. So these two are included into the, has to be included in the package. Wants a donation of $5, $10, or $25. Or you can do it in Bitcoin too. Well, I'm just curious. I'm going to download the Aia file and figure it out. Do you guys want to do that?
Sure.
Or do you think this is a little bit beyond what you really want to do and let's not waste time to do it? Hmm?
I'm okay.
I actually said that we should try it out because if you want to develop your own app.
All right,
someday,
let's do it.
It'd be a good thing to.
Well, that's an if here. If I use this snippet in one of my projects. All right, fine. Okay. Just have to wait a little bit. Now we have the download. Encrypt2.aia. Save the file. This is the kind of app that I would run in an emulator instead of my own phone. Because you never know. Because if there's a security flaw in the app Inventor, okay, where the code can quote unquote break out and actually get access to the other files on my phone, I'll be in big trouble. But running this inside an emulator means, yeah, go ahead and hack the emulator all you want because there's nothing there. Okay, so now we can go to projects, import project from my computer, go to where I saved it. I cannot remember why I saved it, probably in my downloads folder. And it's called encrypt2.aia. Alright, so this is the project that I just imported. It has got, okay, background.
Yeah, I'm going to.
See this here? Those files are uploaded as assets. They're basically included in the app itself. But the tricky part is all the heavy lifting, all the heavy duty programming is not really done in App Inventor. It is done in JavaScript, which I think he in return borrowed from somebody else. Because I cannot imagine this person actually wrote the JavaScript version of the encryption algorithm. Those are probably already around for some time. He extracted a portion of it to make it work inside this environment. Okay, so let's go ahead and see if.
So the question would be that if you borrowed from someone else, you might not.
It depends on whether it's open source or not. Okay, so before building this app, set this flag to false, but since we are not building the app, we're just running it inside the emulator. Let's see, so we'll put a message here and say ABCD. Oh, ABCD, done. And then we click start. Okay, that doesn't, secret passphrase, okay. We'll put in 1, 2, 3, 4. Done. Doesn't seem to do anything. Maybe it does have to be built first before it runs. Alright, so I'm not going to get this to run yet. But the concept is interesting. The guy is borrowing a web component, which you can find right here. And it's using the web component to access the JavaScript code that is embedded into the application itself. The question is, is it finding the JavaScript, files correctly because of the paths? Because if it's not doing that, it won't be able to run. Yep.
One thing that I've noticed that's different in phones than it is in a web page, for instance, if I type in my password to a web page, it automatically turns it into asterisks.
Mhm.
But on the phone, it'll tell me what the plain text is, and then change it to an asterisk before I move on to the next.
You can turn that off. If I remember correctly, there is a setting that you can turn off, so it won't even display the one single digit that you're entering.
I like that feature though, because then make sure that
Yeah.
I typed in the right thing.
That's because on the phone it's harder to touch type, so you're not quite sure. Did I just type lowercase f, or did I type the letter next to it? Because you can't tell like on the phone as easily as on the keyboard.
And I've got fat fingers, so sometimes I'll make mistakes in my texting.
Trust me, yours are not that.
Okay.
there are certain people with fingers where one touch will basically touch like 4 different
Oh,
keys
wow.
on the online keyboard, the on-screen keyboard. Okay, so this doesn't seem to be working, but I think it will work if you build the application and then run it in an emulator. Okay, but I'm not gonna try that. Alright, so getting back to our own program, key value pair. Okay, I have just imported something into it. So what I will do is I'm going to go to the screen and I'll give myself a few interfaces here. We are going to lay out, get a table arrangement. 2 by 2 is good. Okay, I need 2 columns and 2 rows. Go back to user interface. I will pick a label here, put another label over here. Change the labels. The labels need to reflect what I want to show. So the first one is a tag or key. Okay, so they mean exactly the same thing. The second one is the value associated with that tag or key. So I put a value here. And for simplicity, I am only going to include text boxes, so I won't be able to specify anything other than just text with each one of these. So the value or the key or the tag or the key has to be in text, and the same thing about the value. It is also just text. Okay, so that's just my user interface. I'm going to change the name of the variable because otherwise when I'm writing the code in blocks I don't know which text box I'm dealing with. So I'll rename the first one so that it becomes text box, and I'll call it tag. The second one is going to be text box value, so we'll rename it as text box value. There we go. Alright, so with this I want to do several things. I want to be able to store and retrieve this particular item from my list. So I want to put in a few buttons here. So I put in a button here, change the caption of the button to save/add. And then I will change the name of the button itself so that in the blocks I don't have to try to remember, is button 1 the save or is it the delete. So we'll go ahead and change the name to save, button save. Put another button here. This is going to be my button for retrieving, so for loading. And once again, change the name to button load. And I will have a third button for deleting. So this button is for deleting, so it's for delete. And change the name to button delete. There we go. So now we have a very simple application, just the user interface, that allows me to enter the tag or the key of a particular item, to specify the value of a particular item. And then I can do something with the key. I can either store the item with the value, or I can just look at the key and say, okay, I want to retrieve the value related to that tag, or I want to delete that tag altogether from my key value list. So those are the things that I want to be able to do. Is that okay? Does everybody understand what I'm trying to do? Is that okay? All right. So now we go in and we go ahead and do it. Now I'm doing all of this without using TinyDB, because to do this with TinyDB is easy. Okay, each button just has to go to a particular method in TinyDB. but I want to do this with my own list as one single list. I want to be able to do all this. Okay, and for debugging purposes, this is what I will also do. Just for debugging purposes, I am going to put in a label. Okay. Change the text label here for as debug, and then change the name of the label to label debug. Okay, so this is going to be useful to show me, okay, what's exactly in the list. Okay, so now we go to the blocks and actually start to do something about it. This one, I just let it stay here. Okay, I'm not even going to look into it. In fact, the best way to do this so that it stays out of the way is to right click and say collapse block. Okay, because I don't want to look at the content of this block. I just use it. I'm not going to change it in any way. Alright, so now we go to the buttons. Okay, the first button is save. Okay, so I will say, okay, when this button is clicked, what am I going to do? I want to save this. But before we do anything else, we need to declare a global variable. So I'm declaring a global variable, change the name to my list, okay? And I'll give it an empty list to begin with. It has nothing to initial, but it is a list nonetheless. Okay? Because this list is going to store whatever I want to store. Okay? It will start off empty with nothing in it. In reality, you can load it from TinyDB in the Initialize event. But this is what I'll do in this program. So button save is going to just add a key value pair to the list. And I'll do it the simple way first, and then we'll deal with it later. We'll deal with a more complicated one later on. I want to add something to the list. What do? I look at all the things that I can do with lists. You can create an empty list. That's not what I want to do. To make a list, sort of, okay, it might be useful later on. But what I really want to do is just to add an item to the list. So I'm going to add an item to the list here. Which list am I adding these items to? I'm going to add it to my list. So this is my global variable, my list, which is going to have one additional item as I click the button. The new item that I'm adding is by itself another list because it is a key value pair. When we talk about a key value pair, it is a list of exactly two items. The first item is the name or the tag. The second item is the value. Okay. So that's exactly what we'll do. The first item of this list, which is the name, is going to be whatever is the content of text box tag. So I go back to text box tag, grab its text value, and say whatever that text box has as its value is going to be the tag of this new key value item. And then we go to the value text box, grab its text, and say this is going to be the value. Is that okay? All right? But every time we do something on the list, I am going to display in a debug message, okay? So I go to label debug and say I want the text of this label to reflect the content of the global variable list. So I already have my own procedure to do all this. It is called serialize JSON. I will plug it here. And then the what is really just my list. So this is my way of debugging this application. I want to know how the list is getting changed as I add new items to it. Is that okay? All right. I think we are ready to test at least this button at this point. Okay. So we go back to the simulator, and then we just say, oops, it won't let me use the actual keyboard. It wants me to use this one. So I'm typing username as my key or tag. Okay, it means exactly the same thing. And then the value, I'm going to specify my name, tag, T-A-K, uppercase T-A-K, and then I click, well, okay, click the done first. Then I'm going to click save add. Okay, clicking that will actually add the key value pair, and then I will also see the JSON encoding of the list accordingly. Okay. And I know you guys cannot really read this part here, but it says, you know, open square bracket, double quote username and double quote comma, double quote uppercase T A K and double quote and square bracket and square bracket. Let me just write it out on a separate text editor so that we can track what is in it. Okay, because I know it's really hard for you guys to read that. Okay, it's double quote open square bracket, double quote username and double quote comma, double quote again, tag, double quote, close. That's the content at this point. Is that consistent with what the program is supposed to do? I would say so. Okay. So then what I'll do next is I'm going to specify another thing here. So I will specify password, okay? PASSWORD. And I will specify my password as 1234. There we go. 1234. Done. Save. Okay. So now you can see the list is longer. It has a second item. The second item is kind of the same thing as the first item, which is by itself a list already. The first item of that list is password as a string. The second item of that list is 1234 all by itself as a number. Because when it looks at the text value of the value thing, it looks like oh, I can interpret this as a number, and it would just pick the number interpretation, which means you have to be extra careful when you're dealing with this. Okay. All right. So so far are we okay with what this program is doing? Okay.
So when it uses the digits, it doesn't use double quotes.
Say again?
It doesn't use the double quotes.
If it
for
is
the
a number,
numbers.
it doesn't use the quotes.
Oh.
So it's very tricky, because if it is, okay, let's try this, okay? I'm gonna use a new tag, okay, so let me specify a new tag here. So instead of password, let's say this is my high score, okay, high score, HISCORE, and this time I'm gonna put in some leading zeros, okay? So we'll put in some leading. Click here. Okay, and then I'll press save. Okay, so here's the question. Is it going to save it as a string with 3 leading zeros, or is it really just going to save 1234? That's the question. I think it's going to be the latter. Click save. And this time it's saved it as 0001234, but it treats it as a number. But that is my own doing, okay? Because that is my own subroutine doing this. Okay. All right. So now we want to check load, okay? Load doesn't do a single thing. Delete doesn't do a single thing, because I have not written those subroutines yet. So it's time to write load, which is the easier subroutine to write. So I go to load, pick up the click, and I just want to load the value of that particular key pair into the second text box, which is the value text box. So specify the tag in the first text box, click this button, it will retrieve the value into the second one. Okay? All right. So that's not too bad, okay? Because what we need to do is to set the text box, or set the text of the value text box. And it's down here to something, okay? And what that's going to be, I'm not going to bother with error checking. So I go straight to lists and see if I can pick up something here that is useful. What do you, okay. Scroll up a little bit. So what do you think is going to be useful? I think some of you may not be able to see it, but this is as far as I can scroll it unless I change the screen so that I resize it. Just hold on 1 second. Let me resize it a little bit, see if I can do that part here. There we go. All right. So which block do you think I need to use? Because now I already have a key value pair list. So which one? It's the last one, right? The last one says look up in pairs. Okay, let me just show you which one we are talking about. This one here. If you hover up your mouse over it, it says return the value associated with the key in the list of pairs. Now, when it says pairs, it is an abbreviation of key value pairs. So what it wants is three things. The first one is the key, or what we call the tag also. The second one is a list of pairs. And then the third one is, what if it is not found? What am I supposed to indicate if it is not found? Okay. All right. So we'll take this block and stash it here, and then you guys can tell me what am I going to specify as key? The username, which is stored as the text property of which text box? Text box tag.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so we go to text box tag, we go to the text property and drag it over here. What about the pairs? Which one is my list of pairs? What is used here?
The box value. Text box value.
Nope. Nope. The list itself, which is a global variable,
Oh.
is my list. Okay? So now we go to my list. I'm just going to duplicate this one here and stash it over here. Okay? So that should work. Okay? If I don't make a mistake, this has no error checking. Okay? So it's not very forgiving. Okay? But for the purpose of this illustration, it should work if I'm careful about it. All right. So getting back to here, the first thing I'll do is I'm going to erase everything here. So this way it starts with nothing. Then I go back to the key here, and I say I want to retrieve the username, not high score. So I just type username here, USERNAME. Okay, there we go. All right. So when I click load, the value text box should change to tag because it's already in the list. Okay, we know it's in the list. So we say load, and it reflects tag. So it is okay, it's working. Okay? Are we still doing okay so far with this? So now we're going to go for the last button, which is delete. Because sometimes you're not just adding something, sometimes you want to delete an item. Okay? So we want to find out, okay, but how do we delete an item from a list of pairs? Okay? That one turns out to be a little bit harder. So we'll go ahead and, well, first of all, before I do anything to do it on my own, I'm going to check this list of available blocks here, because if it's already here, I don't have to do it myself. Okay, so let's check out this stuff here. This is the bottom. This one is just looking up. It's not going to be helpful. List from CSV, list from CSV. Okay, these are all just converting between a CSV file and a CSV comma separated value format and a list, internal list. It's not going to be helpful. This one tells me whether something is a list or not. It's good for error checking, but it's not going to be helpful. This one is copying a list to a new list. Not what I want to do. Appending a list to another list, making the first one longer. Yeah, it's appending list 2 to the end of list 1. It makes the first list longer. That's not what I want to do either. Remove list item. That might be useful, but how do I know which index? I don't. Okay, because in a list of key value pairs, it is the key that identifies the item, not the index. So I don't know which index, but it seems like this may be useful. Okay, so when you're doing programming and you see something that might be useful, you might just want to kind of pick it out and put it to a place in your program just as a reminder and say this might be useful. All right, so this might be useful, and let's continue the list here. Insert list item. No, we are not inserting. Select list item based on the index. That's not what we are doing. Index in thing. Find the position of the thing in the list. If it's not in the list, return 0. That seems like what we want to do, but it's not going to do it, because what we want to find is a text, but it's not in the pair list itself, it is in one of the pairs. So that's not going to be useful either. Pick a random item in a list, not going to be helpful. Is a list empty? Not going to be helpful, not immediately. Length of list, not going to be helpful, not immediately. Is in list, not going to be helpful, not immediately. The other ones are not going to be useful immediately. Okay, so it looks like we don't have a choice but to implement our own subroutine or our own logic to do it. Is that okay? Because there's no way to remove a particular key value item from a list of pairs. It's not provided. Okay? How many people have already gone through the concept of loops in your CISD 300 class? Okay, so there are a few. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll do something like that, and we'll see how to make use of that. Okay, so we go to procedures. I'll turn this into procedure so that I can use it anywhere I want to. So we'll go to a procedure. We'll change the name of the procedure to remove item from pairs. Okay, there we go. So this way the naming convention is consistent with App Inventor's own naming convention. It will need to specify two things. So these are quote unquote inputs or parameters. The first parameter is indicating what is the name of the tag. Okay, if you prefer, you can say key. The second one is going to indicate which one is my list of pairs. Okay, so that's going to be my second parameter. Okay, click close. All right, so now the question is, how do we get this done? We know that the only easy way to remove an item from a list is to use remove list item, but that only works based on the index. Okay, so now we need to keep track of an index. But if you know that you need to keep track of an index that is going to change over time, it needs to be a variable. You need to be able to store that to utilize it. So that means we need a local variable. It's not a global because I don't need the rest of the program to know about this index. So it can be a local variable. So now we go to variables and we pick out initialize local variable so that this way we can initialize this variable. I'll just call it index. And we'll set it to 0. Oops. That. So we'll go to math, pick out a number, and just set it to 0. Just like that. Okay. And we'll need another variable. This one is just the one that is running through, but we'll need a second one to keep track of the one that is found. Okay. So we'll go ahead. Well, there are several ways to do it. We can just use a local variable called found, and we can initialize that to false, okay, which is not found initially. Okay, so we have two variables. One is called index, the other one is called found. One that will let us remember what was the last item that we went through. The second one will help me remember, did I find the item that I was looking for? Okay. All right, so what we'll do, okay, let me see what is it saying. Body with no expressions. Okay, I think it's just complaining that we have nothing here. All right, so the next thing we have to do is to specify a loop so that we can go through the list until we find the item or until there's nothing left. So we go to control and look at control here. This one seems to be useful for each item in list, blah, 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 okay? But we cannot use it because it doesn't let us remember the index of the item. So that's not going to be helpful. What we'll do is we'll use a while test, okay? Which is, when you look at the word while, it is really the same thing as long as. So it means as long as whatever the test condition is true, then we'll keep going through the thing, okay? We'll keep repeating the same thing over and over. Okay, so what are we testing? We stay in the loop when two conditions are both true. We want to stay in the loop when I haven't gone through the entire list. That's one reason. And the second reason that has to be true at the same time is I haven't seen the item that I'm looking for. In other words, as long as one, I haven't gone through the entire list, and two, the thing that I'm looking for is not found, I want to keep going. Okay? So because I need both conditions to be true at the same time, I go to logic and specify and here. Okay? Because this is the only way to specify, both of these conditions have to be true to stay in the loop. Let's deal with the easy one first. The easy one is it is not found yet. Okay? I already have a variable called found, so not found specifies the first part. The second part is I haven't gone through the entire thing yet. Now how do I know that I haven't gone through the entire thing yet? I can make use of index. And I can make use of the number of items in the list, length of list. So I can now compare the length of the pair list with the index. So any comparison you have to go to math and then specify the compare thing. We'll put it here. So as long as index is less than the length of the entire list, that means we haven't looked through everything yet. Is that okay? Because index starts from 0, which is not even the index of the first item. Okay. All right. So the first thing we'll do is we're going to add one to index. So we go to variables, set index to index plus 1. There's no easy way to do this. In most programming languages, it's pretty easy to do this kind of thing, but in App Inventor, there's a whole lot of dragging and dropping just to do this. So we add one to the index first, because that will get us to the current item. And then the next thing we'll do is kind of strange, but it does work. Okay. So assuming this is a list of pairs, I'm going to do this. So the second item is going to set found to the following. Okay, assuming the key is always a text string, so I will go to text here and then use the compare text feature, and this time I'm comparing the key that is given to me and say this is what I'm supposed to find. I want to see if it does equal to the key of the pair at the current index. There we go. I said it. Okay. So we're comparing the key that is given to me to the key of the pair that is currently indexed in the pairs, in the pair list. Okay? So how do we get that? Well, we go to list, okay, because we know it has got to be inside a list. So we'll go to index in list. We'll need it twice. Nope, that's not what we want. Okay, let me look again. Select list item. There we go. Okay, so we know the name is the first item of a pair. So this way we go to math. We just pick out a constant. Turn this into a 1. But remember, this is a pair within a list. So we need another. Where is it? Index in. Nope, that's not what I want. I want the same thing here, just duplicate it and put it here. Except the index is not a constant this time. The index is now my index variable. So I will go to index, get, and then stash it here. And then this list is going to be my pairs list. So I go here, get my pairs, and then stash it here. There we go. Alright, so this block is really long and it's a little bit complicated. So let me just read the entire thing again. I'm setting the found variable. Now, as the name found implies, it's either true or false. Okay, it's Boolean. Okay, because it's either found or not. How do I know whether it's found or not? Using a compare. What am I comparing? The first part of the compare is just the key that is passed to this subroutine, because that indicates, that tells me, what is the key that I'm looking for. Equals to. What about the other part? The other part is the key of the pair that is currently indexed by the index variable in the pairs list, in the pair list known as pairs. Okay? So that's, I know it's a mouthful, okay? So when you watch the video again, you can slow-mo it. And write it down, okay? Okay. So that means, if found is ever turned to true because of this comparison, this loop is going to exit because, it says here, as long as found is not true. So when found becomes true, not found is false, and if you have false on one side of AND, the entire thing is false. So I can now say, okay, but what do we do after the loop? After the loop, we need a conditional statement, because we need to determine whether found is true or not, because then we'll decide what to do. So we go to the if then. We don't really need an else in this case, just if then is fine. So I'll say if found, then we can use the other block to remove an item from the list. The list is pairs, so we go to get pairs. The index is the index variable that we have been tracking, because as soon as it finds it, the loop exits with the index variable set to the actual index of the item that we want to delete. Is that okay? But just conceptually, okay, I know that there's a lot of detail in it. Okay, just conceptually, this is how we are doing it. Okay. All right, the subroutine is done. Now it is time to finish this program by attaching this to my third button, which is the delete button. Okay, so when the delete button is clicked, this is what I'll do. I'm going to use my own subroutine called remove item from pairs. The key is going to be the text value of the tag text box. So we go to the tag text box, retrieve the text property from this text box, and use it to specify my key. The pairs is going to be my global variable. Okay, so I just go to global variable, and it's going to be my list. So this should remove that item. But I'm also going to redisplay the debug message. So I will replicate this block here and drag it all the way down. Okay, this is what I really don't like about graphical programming, is when you have something to copy and paste and it's not right next to each other, it is a little bit cumbersome, but it can be done. Okay, so it should work. Let's check whether it works or not. Switch back to the emulator. Let's make a new item just for deleting, okay? So we'll just go ahead and make a new item just for deleting. So we say this is test delete, okay? T-E-S-T-D-E-L. Test del is fine. And we'll give it a value. Okay, we'll just say A, B, C, D. Done. Save. Okay. So now you can see that my list has 4 items. Okay. The first one is username that has a value of tag. The second one is password. It has a value of 1, 2, 3, 4. Then we have high score with a value of 0, 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the last one is the one that I want to delete, which is testdel, T-E-S-T-D-E-L, with a value of A, B, C, D. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go to value here. Just get rid of the value. It's not useful for this operation. And I'm going to click delete. Okay. Click it. And you can see the last item is now gone. Okay. So this is a fairly simplistic sample program, but it does help illustrate how you can add new items to a pairs list, how you can retrieve items in the pairs list, and how you can delete items from the pairs list. Okay? It doesn't really have a whole lot of testing, so it's not really robust, but it does show you, the basic code that you need to manipulate a pairs list. Okay? Here comes the big question. in an actual program, what do you think this pass list that we're dealing with is in? It can be a global variable like my list. It can be an item. It can be the value of another key value pair. So this can be nested inside another key value pair list, which can be nested within another one. And it will still work. The method that we specify here will still work, even when it's all nested. The code is going to look nasty, but the idea will still work. All right. So I'm suspecting some of you may want to get a hold of this program so you can import some of that code. So I'm going to upload it to Moodle so that you guys have access to it. Okay. So let's do that. We'll save the project, export to my computer. There we go. Save the file. Go back to Moodle. I think I have one section on lists already. There we go. So I'm going to stash it here under topic 9. I need to turn on editing first. There we go. And okay, I cannot use the screen when it's maximized. So, upload the file. Okay, this is list. Add, load, and delete. Nope. What was the name of the program? Key value pair. Key value pair.aia. File. Save and return. All right, so now this project is uploaded. So you can start to integrate some of this code into your project. Or at least play with it so that you know how it works. And that's the important part. What if you look at what I do in class and go like, well, I can follow most of what I'm doing, what Tech is doing, but not entirely, and you have time on your own to go through this code here, especially the subroutine, this one here, okay? Because this is a fairly straightforward subroutine. I won't ask you to write subroutines like this in this class, but I think it might be helpful just to understand the logic of this. Because even though I'm doing this in App Inventor, you could have easily done the same logic in Perl, in PHP, in Python, in Visual Basic, okay? Because all of those scripting languages have similar features to what we are doing here. So the logic is actually quite useful, even though it is only in App Inventor at this point. So what you can do is to download the Aia file, import it into your own project, and then you can document it. Okay? Use the comments feature and just document it. And use your own way to explain, okay, this is a loop, this is what it's supposed to do, and then inside the loop, why are we setting the index, why, how we are setting the found, and how we're making use of lists. Okay? So if you have time, that's what I would do, is to just download the program and then just comment it using your own words. Right? Are there any questions? No questions? Has anyone tried to use the text feature of App Inventor? SMS texting? No? Okay. So I'm just going to use up a little bit more time, then I'll be done with the lecture. Okay, so I'll just go to, I think it's under media. Nope, it's under social, there we go. That makes more sense. So if you click on text, it shows you a help here. So I'm going to go to more information. Okay, texting is interesting. Okay, maximizing a little bit, zooming in the text. A component that will, when send message method is called, send the text message specified in message property to the phone number specified in phone number property. Okay, fairly easy, right? One will specify the content, the other one specifies the phone number. But you can only send one string. What if you have a whole bunch of items to send? This relates all the way back to what we were talking about earlier. You zip it up, but we don't have zip. We do have serialized JSON. So you just take your entire list, okay? It can be very long, complicated, with all kinds of stuff in it. Doesn't matter. Call serialized JSON. It gives you back a single text value. Specify that text value into message, which is the property of a texting, okay? Send it away. So the other end will receive that whole string, right? So what the other side is going to do is to enable receiving, okay? So this application will now be able to receive text. When you receive text, the message received event is going to raise, providing the sending number and the message. Then you can use the same application to decode the message and get everything back as a, back into a list. You just have to use a web component to decode JSON. Then you can get back the entire list. So this is a quick and easy way to send a lot of information, structured information, without having to do a whole lot of protocols and stuff like that. It's just pack it up, JSON encode, and then after you receive, JSON decode. Any questions? No questions? Alrighty, well, if there are no questions, I'm going to stop the recorder, and I will go ahead and let you guys ask, any questions related to the material that might be in exam 1 on Wednesday.